Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Global Forum of Teachers Education of today. I'm delighted to speak to you this afternoon about the power of storytelling. My name is Julia Benz. I am currently based in Berlin, and I'm a researcher at the Nova University in Lisbon, where I'm leading a project called Art for Adaptation. That is about the potential of art to communicate, educate, and engage diverse audiences in the topics of climate change, sustainability, and transformation. And today I speak to you about my experience with learning through art and story as a way to realize the decade of action that was called for by the United Nations. So when we look at this, we can see that there's a tremendous amount of knowledge that is being produced about climate change. Yet, on the other side, we don't see broad-scale action according to this vast amount of knowledge. So the sixth assessment report will cover about 1,000 times as many papers as the first group of IPCC reports in 1990. And there's virtually no uncertainty. Yet, how do we translate this knowledge? So I will focus my presentation on how we can inspire empowerment and action in order to close this gap between what we know about climate change and how we act upon it. I'm interested in the questions how we can initiate and foster sustainable and equitable transformation, and what kind of approaches lead to individual and collective agency and action. And also, what role can play education to support this action and agency toward equitable and sustainable change? When we look at how young people feel these days about climate change, we see that climate change is becoming an issue that contributes to worry, to feelings of sadness, anxiety, and powerlessness. This study surveyed young people aged between 16 and 25 years old in 10 countries. And it shows that many young people are aware of climate change, otherwise they couldn't be worried. But it might be worth asking if climate change education, as it is provided, contributes to climate action, or if it also contributes to these growing feelings of anxiety and sadness. So a critical question might be if the way climate education and communication is provided equips them to be active and agents of change. And this research has found that there is a positive correlation between feelings of agency and the levels of engagement with climate-friendly behavior. It surveyed about 800 teenagers on their attitude. And, well, of course, this doesn't mean that we do not need to provide knowledge about climate change, but it shows that knowledge provision alone is not enough. So, is there room for improvement in climate education? Well, I think there is. But what can be done to lead to both well-informed broad-scale action? Well, research has shown that it is problematic to perpetuate the narrative of which has been named the gloom and doom narrative, because this narrative focuses solely on the risks and dangers and communicates messages of fear rather than showcasing real examples of active engagement. It has been criticized that it contributes to feelings of denial, numbing, apathy, and powerlessness. So it's really crucial to search for alternative narratives and imaginaries about positive futures that can be put forward. Another limitation I see is that the focus is very much on small behavior changes as solutions. While behaviors are important entry points for adaptation and mitigation and to learn about climate change, they are only a part of the bigger picture of transformative change. Yeah, and ultimately, most educational approaches pay limited attention to how behavior changes are influenced by political structures and cultural values, and often ignore power relations and vested interests that perpetuate certain behaviors and discourage others. And finally, despite the knowledge about the potential of transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary approaches, they are still marginal. So here is an example. Oh no, sorry, not yet the example. So I think it is really crucial to integrate both the technical and practical solutions and methods, the behavior changes, together with the core values and principles that underpin and motivate transformative change. So these are kind of the lower part of the iceberg, the larger part, one can say. And to focus really on how transformation happens rather than only what is it that we need to change, I think that is an approach. So here's the example how this can look like in an educational context. So we have the participants, which are 11th grade, and these participants were invited to adopt the challenge, a 30-day experiment with change. And that would be free of choice what they could do for 30 days. And during these 30 days, they reflected individually and in groups about how their behaviors connected to social norms, to structures, to systems, and to values. And ultimately, they produced artwork. So this process aims to trigger insight and awareness about the dynamics of social change. It is designed as a reflexive process for examining the relationships between individual change, collective change, and systems change. And it is experiential. It's a learning and action program, a group process. And that creates sort of a container, a laborative practice, where the students can experiment and create a space for action. So the focus on the self-identified behavior change is the starting point. Then the students connect the practical, the political, and the personal spheres of transformations. And here are some results of the artworks that were produced in these projects and of the exhibition that I organized at the European Climate Change Adaptation Conference. And here's also a quote from one of the students from the questionnaire survey that evaluated the experience, saying that this project went from knowing, because we all knew there was climate change, to acting. The action we took, however small, gave us a different awareness of the global situation than just knowing. We started to think more about what we could do and what was really going on. So this describes this shift from knowing about climate change to moving to action, and shows this small entry point to a broader perception of a global change. And this was published in a paper in Elementa, the Science of the Anthropocene, and also in an article in Climatic Change that highlights the potential of inter- and transdisciplinary approaches to learning about climate change, and the importance of learning in action and learning through art to connect the cognitive and the emotional dimensions of climate change. This also is linked to the power of story. Stories as well as art have a powerful role in engaging us in a personal, in a collective experience. They allow us to feel about climate change. in a way that moves us, and then open our imagination to new possibilities. So the power of stories, that is also at the center of this seminar today, is related to the fact that stories are related to our evolutionary process, to the evolution of our cognitive processes. So for as long as humans have lived together and interacted with the environment, they have constructed stories. Storytelling helped making wisdom understandable, making it transferable, and making it compelling. So storytelling helps people to understand their surroundings. And I really love this quote by Lucille Clifton, an American poet, saying that we cannot create what we can't imagine. So presenting, co-creating, and telling new stories about sustainability enables us to create these new realities, and therefore it is very important to train our imagination and to work with it. So and one way to do this also is to work with new metaphors. And as you all aware, climate change is very much communicated through metaphors, but often not through metaphors that are generative, I would say. So there are new metaphors also, like spaceship Earth, kinship, stewardship, or the idea of planet Earth as a living being that can help us to create a different perception about our relation in this challenge. And I will illustrate this idea of new metaphors through this project that was called the Climate Odyssey. That also, this metaphor of an odyssey also set the tone as climate change as an discovery journey for the participants, in this case a local community in Lisbon, to engage in climate change and in themselves in a way. So we used a lot of storytelling, photo voice, visioning, and creative writing, and we produced with them a performance based on their stories. So there was no script when we started with the project. We engaged the participants in these exercises in storytelling and created this performance, this play that was shown at a local festival in Lisbon in 2019. And it was also, the results were also published in a scientific article that can be found online. So one thing that became really evident in this process of the Climate Odyssey is the power of co-creation. So there is a relationship between meaning making and agency, and consequently we should support people to engage in their own meaning making and empower them to tell their own stories. And this could be a way to close the knowledge action gap related to climate change. So co-creative art and story have a huge potential, I believe, to integrate diverse knowledges and perspectives, to engage very diverse social groups, to build spaces of mutual learning and respect, and to engage with complex and abstract topics such as sustainability, climate change, and transformation on a personal level, on an emotional level, and that helps to link these issues to the very own lives and communities. So to conclude, my experience and my research has shown me that the decade of action requires more than only knowledge transfer, however important it is. to provide knowledge about climate change. But we need more than that. And I see a huge potential on interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary approaches involving art and story. And ultimately, the potential of experiential and co-creative practices that involve art and story has to create this sense of agency, this sense of empowerment, yeah, is really strong in my view. And to close, I will leave you with a quote. The future is not a place we are going to, but one we are creating. The paths to it are not found but made, and the activity of making them changes both the maker and the destination. John Shar. Thank you very much, and I would be delighted to answer any possible questions.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Julia, for that lovely presentation. It was lovely to listen to you telling about storytelling and really the science behind it all. So I'll take the words from here and go a little bit more into the act of storytelling, the art of storytelling, and how you can tell engaging personal stories through words and images. My name is Marte Skåra. I'm based in Oslo, Norway. My background is started in journalism, and I think that's where I really understood, the power of storytelling and got engaged with storytelling. Then I went on to study meteorology and oceanography, so really the climate science. Really realizing the urgency of climate change. When I did my master's in human geography, I realized the potential of humans, not just as the ones causing climate change, but the only ones who can really deal with it. So that's, I think, why, for me personally, it's so. I find storytelling so interesting and powerful. Yeah. So I run this project that is called Climate Creativity. We work with stories and art to tell people's stories of how they experience climate change, what they think about it, their reflections, their ideas, knowledge. Yeah. We've been doing a lot of different storytelling projects, especially with youth, and I wanted to introduce you to some of them. So one of them is a book we did with a handful of Canadian youth organizations, amplifying the voices of BIPOC youth in Canada, where the youth were telling their stories about climate change action, hope, and emotions. We did another one with youth in Norway, where we had a writing competition in Norwegian schools, and the students wrote their stories about their motivation for climate change actions. It was a really interesting project where the youth really showed that, their stories really showed that you don't have to become a politician or, a grown-up at all to act on these issues. We can act as students, as daughters, sisters, brothers. We have all these roles in societies in which we can create change. And then we had a project called The Future We Want, Stories of Recovery, where we challenged 9 artists and 9 young storytellers to imagine a sustainable future resulting from a just recovery. And I think this is, what Juliet talked about, um, how we can really improve and close the knowledge action gap, um, presenting more positive futures, and really, making this path to the future by imagining futures that we actually want. So these are all lovely stories that I encourage you to read. This particular one was written by Eliana from Chicago, who wrote about in the future she wants there is a community of growers on all gardens where people are, not just growing for profit, but where there's this community exchange of food and knowledge, building community together. What we're doing with in climate creativity is really that we try to highlight personal stories. And what do I mean by a personal story? A personal story is not an individualistic one. It is a story that is attentive to our beliefs, values, worldviews, and paradigms. Very often, when we talk about climate change and also in learning situations, we focus on the practical spheres, our behaviors, and the technical responses. We talk about, you can take your bike to school or work, you can put solar panels on your roof, recycle your garbage, all of these, like Julia said, like all these small actions that we can do. And while those are super important, they tend to get a lot of focus. And we must not forget these other dimensions. The political sphere is often including like the systems and structures that we're part of. But then you have the personal spheres that are really the beliefs, value, worldviews, and paradigms that shape the systems and structures, who again kind of tell us which behaviors and responses that are desirable and possible. So, can storytelling kind of bring us into this personal sphere, make us see the connections that Julia talked about between like system change, personal change, individualistic change? And I really think it do. And it can. So in our project, we collected personal stories from people all over the world, hundreds of stories, and we worked with artists to illustrate those stories, to communicate them both through words and images. And what we see, what we experience doing this work, is that storytelling has the power to encourage reflection, both by the storyteller, who really have to think about like what they want to write about, what is their journey, what do they care about, what stories that I want to tell, and for the listener or the reader who is reflecting on what they are reading. So we see that it really helps the storytellers to shape their life stories. You know, it makes us ask the question like, what do we want our stories to be about? If I'm the main character in this story, in this life, like, what do I want to do with my life? It can also help the listeners to understand the situation of other people and grow our capacity for empathy. I want to use an example where my father, he was home on my family's farm, the west coast of Norway, and he was reading one of the stories from the project where a Black woman in the US was writing about an experience she had as a child where her father was being told to leave a swimming pool because of the color of his skin. So this was really an experience of racism. And my father sitting, so far away from the US, uh, reading the story, he had this very emotional response like, how could anyone do that to this man and, his little daughter who was watching? And he was, I think, like outraged in a way, but also deeply moved uh, to see that this woman, the storyteller, was using this experience from her childhood in her life now. She became a marine biologist. She's really a person fighting for climate change action, um, and how this was also, made her realize the injustices, but also helps her in her work see this connection between the social perspectives, the human perspective, and like the nature perspective in her work with marine conservation. Um, then there's this aspect where story can also feed the listener's imagination and open our mind to new and alternative possibilities, knowledge, and ideas. Stories are really the way humans have always learned about new things. And I'll go into more concrete examples later on in this presentation. I'll also show you an example of how storytelling can really connect people, places, and see the interconnections between the problems, sustainable challenges that we are experience in this time. It's not just climate change, loss of nature, um, poverty, um, all these kind of social injustices that people around the world are experiencing. So I wanted to go a little bit into how to structure a story. Like there are 1,000 ways to tell your story. So this is just to give you some ideas, some elements of storytelling um, that we've been seeing through our work that is really like effective. So, introducing the issue by stating just about what you care about and why. Bringing up a personal experience or memory to really, let the reader get to know you. Including this emotional response, really being vulnerable in your story, um, including a value statement. What value do you stand for? Including ideas, knowledge, solutions, as well as your hopes, motivations, and intentions. So I want to start by, this element of just introducing the issue. And it can be done in so many ways. And I wanted to show you Kyla, a young woman from Canada, and how she did it. She wrote that most Black and Brown folks have a complicated relationships with growing food. Either our lands were stolen from us, or we were forced to leave them against our will, or we had to leave our lands because life there wasn't feasible. The lands know this complicated history, and so do our spirits. What I love about Kyla's introduction is both that she's telling us what she cares about, but also why she cares about this. This has to do with the land where she's living on, and it has to do with her spirit. Then there's the emotional response. Very often, the reason why we remember something or an experience or memory was very important to us is because it touched us emotional. Maybe it made us really angry or really sad or really happy and joyful. There's a range of emotions, and it's not important what emotions they are. It's just how you felt. So Francisca is writing that the ocean is often the only place where I feel fully myself. I regularly end up struggling with my own brain, and there's something about being out in the water, weightless and cold, and without any distractions, that helps me crawl back into my body again. For a while, I can simply float, surrounded by endless sky and embraced by water that's teeming with varieties of life I can't even begin to imagine. I feel my body and my mind realigning into something that feels like wholeness, and I come back to myself. I think storytelling is a great way to show connections between mental health and planetary health, like in this story, and also connection between humans and the rest of the natural world. The story is really about how Francisco feels like part of the ocean. It is the ocean that makes her feel whole, help her come back to herself. Um, and it's also, some of you will hopefully join us for a storytelling workshop later where we'll actually meet up on Zoom and engage with storytelling. And I will invite you to actually share your stories. And it's a reminder that a story doesn't have to be anything exceptional, or, it can be something very, very down to earth, something everyday, something familiar, something safe. It can just be about swimming in the water. And most of us have these experience either with nature or just with, interacting with other people, um, that that is important to us, and that is important to share. Then there's the element of the personal experience or memory. I really love this one. It's a story that we just shared through our Instagram, Climate Illustrated. And it says, before I could walk, I spent hours on my mother's back my, in the farm. So naturally, my consciousness started in a certain environment. Houses were the place where we come to sleep, but generally, life was spent where life flourishes. This story is by Kankanko, indigenous elder from Cameroon. And it really shows us that, we are our memories, we are shaped by our experiences. And reflecting on these memories and experiences is really reflecting on who we are and who we want to become. Then there's the value statement. Um, I think this little text from Natalie's story is not really belonging to this illustration, but I wanted to include the boat because I think, such of if you look at the illustration first, such a short message, eco, not ego. It's such a powerful statement. It's just 3 words. And when you visualize it, it becomes even more powerful. And that's often the thing with value statements. They don't really have to be super long. If you remember from the first element, it was Kyla talking about, how lands were stolen from them. And I remember her value statement. She said, climate justice is social justice, is food justice. You can't have one without the other. It's just 2 sentences, but they're stuck in my mind. I'll never forget them. And that's the power of stating your values. I included this one by Natalie because I think it's really important. She writes, I keep hearing things like, we are the virus, or this planet would be fine if there were no humans on it. I disagree. This world was not made for us, but we are made to be part of this world. It's easy to forget that for a very long time, humans had a relationship of reciprocity with Earth. I don't know if there's a word for it, but I'm searching for a word that means this place is better because you are here. I think Natalie is searching for a word or a value that is not yet, Maybe she will have to come up with a word for it, or, search for it outside of the Spanish or English language. Uh, so it's more like a value quest than a value statement, but I think it's so strong. And I think it is a reminder, do we see humans as the problem or the solution? And I think, how we view human is such a defining um, belief for how we view the world and how we view climate change and the solutions to it. um, ideas, knowledge, solutions. I couldn't choose one word for this title because, um, yeah, I think maybe, like Julia said, just wisdom might be an even better word. Um, this is a story in the form of a poem by uh, Nakarori, who writes that I am our universe's stardust, that my ancestral shamanic spirits serve, laugh with my aura, radiate from my heart, kiss my cheeks, tickle my tummy, sing to my eyes, and dance in my ears. We are the caressing stardust from our universe. We are connected through our earth, water, fire, and air that originate from the universe's stardust. May we collaborate in doing our parts to nurture our planet and ourselves. What Nakarori does is that, you know, he's able to connect people to the rest of the planet, but also the past to the present to the future. Uh, if you look at the illustration, the person in the illustration is part Nakarori and part his ancestors. Uh, the process for making this illustration was done. It was a collaboration between both the artist Kelly Densmore from the US and Nakarori, and we met up on Zoom, the three of us, to talk about illustration, what we wanted it to 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 convey. And for Nakarori, it was very important that we kept this little line in the face because, like, he is not his ancestors, but he is connected to them. So he wanted them in there. And I think that's so beautiful. Um, and it's also, you know, it also has all these elements in it, the rainbow, the musical notes, the butterfly, the the pink ribbon, um, this medallion of the earth, which I think for Nakarari are like symbols of the future he wants, the future, like, and how he himself tries to create that future. And I also think that something that story can do, is kind of challenge our notion of knowledge and what knowledge is. We often think of scientific knowledge, but um, in stories, indigenous wisdom or any other wisdom shows us that this can be just as a powerful form of knowledge as anything, researched in a university. I often encourage storytellers to include something about their hope, motivation, or intention. And I think it's important here to highlight that um, you should feel no need to try to find this like forced optimism or forced positivity because we should be hopeful. We should not give up. um, I see hope as something very different. you know the world is so beautiful, and when you connect to it and really open your eyes to all the magical things that are in the world, hope tends to emerge from everywhere. And I think this little part of Nivedita's story really shows that you can find hope, in the most, in anything in nature. And she finds her hope in birds. She says that birds are a beacon of hope in the hopelessness and despair of our world, full of tumultuous changes and power imbalances. They help me believe in things that are worth saving. They help me envision a world where there is no need to protect them anymore. They make me want to see them in their element, sitting on trees, having a sip of water, enjoying the sun. And if we just search within us, I think we can all find something um, that inspire us or motivate us or gives us hope. I know for me, I also have a bird that inspires me. It's a very specific bird. It's called steinskvett in Norwegian, and I have no idea what it's called in English. But it's a beautiful little bird that every spring sits on this little rock just in front of our house on the farm. And it will come there and sit there and look for food and search over the field. And then it flies away with the food to its nest that is very close. And it will come back to the rock. So, just seeing this bird there on the rock, I don't know, I can't quite explain how it makes me feel, but it definitely has to do with hope. Yeah, so these are all elements that can be brought into stories. And I just want to say to you that if you want to have these kind of stories in your inbox regularly, you should sign up for our newsletter on climatecreativity.com. And then I wanted to thank you for listening. Uh, it's been a joy talking to you all. Um, and I hope you'll also join us for the storytelling workshop later on. So, yeah. I think, Julia, do you want to say some words for closure or in the end?
Well, I think we can have some time for questions.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
I see many comments. Thank you for your interaction. Maybe, okay, let's see if we have questions.
Yeah, if anyone have questions, this is when you should put them into the comments on Facebook.
Yes. And if
And
you have already written them, maybe repost them because they have been many hellos from all over the world, which is wonderful.
Hello.
Yes.
hello.
Okay, here we
Yeah, the questions are now on the screen.
go.
Okay, that's wonderful. Carol is asking how we can influence young people to take an interest in storytelling, where they will not think it is not being dictated or insisted on them. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think what Julia said about, the projects that you do, Julia, about like keeping it as an exploration, um, that it's really a journey, and it's for, exploring our relationship to ourselves and others and nature. And I think also something that I experience, and I think this is not just for youth, but for all ages, that I always try to tell people who's joining, for example, the storytelling workshops, that whatever story you want to tell is the right story. There is no right and wrong. Sometimes the expectations that we feel others have for us is kind of making us self-censor, or like thinking our stories is not important, or that they're not positive enough or hopeful enough. So just telling the youth that, whatever you want to share, I want to hear it,
Mhm.
empowering them in this way. And also just, this try to give them this feeling that, their stories matter, and um, that everyone has a story to tell.
Yeah, exactly. That was what I can add to that. I mean, I really believe everybody has a story to tell, being a child, being an elder, and to create that space to tell these personal stories. One way to go around this censor that Marta mentioned is to start by oneself to tell my story, and that shows that it doesn't have to be like a huge story. It doesn't have to be a huge event. It can be something very small, something very personal. And yeah, so like Marta said, there's no right or wrong in what stories we tell. Yes, so that could be a way.
Yeah. The other question is how storytelling method can link the students to develop rational and logical thinking. I think, you know, like I kind of showed with the examples that stories can convey so many different forms of knowledge and thinking. And also, to kind of connect these, more like rational ways of thinking that we often do in the Western world or like in scientific institutions to different kind of knowledge, to indigenous knowledge, to knowledge from experience and to wisdom, and maybe help see that these are not in opposition or like two different things, that they can be that they are connected.
Hmm. Yes. Yes, I think stories can weave in scientific knowledge, for example, can weave in technical knowledge. And as Marta said, there's no opposition, but they also bring in this very personal, emotional, and value-based dimension that is often omitted or doesn't have space in arenas that are focusing only on the technical, the scientific, and the cognitive forms of knowledge. So, yes, I think there's no limit what kind of stories we tell.
For sure. I love this next question. Like, how can you be an effective storyteller, especially in a story wherein you're not yet familiar since it happened many years ago? Um, and I think there's this like grounding technique that I learned in a storytelling workshop, where in the start every participant were asked to say um, what they see, what they hear, what they smell, what they taste, and what they feel. And I think this is a great way to like start thinking about like the sensations you have now. And I think this exercise can actually help us to remember back to the sensations you had at a uh, um, particular moment in time, although it was a long time ago.
Mhm. This also might relate to the question that Salima is posting about the tips of how storytelling can be more engaging for young children to work with sensations and also to work with role play in a way. I have made some experiences to work with young children to, for example, tell a story from an animal perspective. Um, they love doing that and are very creative. For example, building a mask about a endangered animal and writing from that animal's perspective. Writing, for example, I've done a workshop with sixth graders. They are about 10 years old, and they wrote a story and they wrote a letter from this animal perspective, and that worked really well.
That's such a cool concept. I love that. The next question is from Sarah, asking, what are the best elements of storytelling? And I think this is something that I talked a little bit in my presentation, where I mentioned both like introducing the topic you want to write about, including your memories, experience, emotions, values, wisdoms, and sources of hope. And those are just example of some elements. But really, the wonderful thing about storytelling is that you can include anything that you feel is right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and of course there are some traditional elements such as characters, heroes, metaphors, memes, and the plot. So this can also be used.
For sure. Yeah.
Teach moral value through storytelling sessions. Yeah, that's a great question. I think that is, I mean, most young people, they really they know what they stand for, they know what they value, and they don't have difficulties to naming them. And although I believe that universal values might be embodied differently, might be experienced and lived in a different way, they are unifying in a way. So, or they are expressed differently, but they have a unifying core between them, and that is, I don't think that is something we need to teach, but something we can relate with human beings, with young children, with people across different backgrounds and cultures. For example, by speaking about my personal values, by speaking from my stand for what I care for. For example, ask the question, what do you care for? Is a way to to dive in this value dimension and to as an entry point, for example.
So the next question is, how can we get introvert students into storytelling? I'm not sure if I have like an overall, answer to that. I think it depends, on the person. But I feel, what Julia mentioned, like, for example, tell the story from an animal's perspective or like telling the story from someone else's perspective, is that something it can be very scary to share something personal about yourself. But if you're kind of talking through an animal or through someone else, it might be easier. Maybe you have some other advice, Julia?
That is a great example. I mean, another example could be, for example, I showed some pictures from cyanotype printing in my presentation. So that was a way also to create a metaphor with plants and with really an artistic metaphor about the future we want, about the future that I want, and to write a story about the pathway to that future. That is somehow it is a technique of backcasting to visualize a future that I desire, that we desire, create a metaphor for it, and then write a story. So that is another way to engage in story.
I think also like maybe the use of images, like,
Yeah.
no, you don't always have to tell your story through words. Maybe you can draw it, if you're an introvert that think it's, scared to speak, for example, in a crowd or with other people listening. Maybe it's easier to actually like visualize it, through art or other forms of like more, being creative with your hands.
Yeah. And also I've made good experiences with first just techniques like pair and share then with the group to have smaller groups and share personal stories just with one person. That is it's kind of a step-by-step approach where more introvert people don't feel so exposed. don't feel, it is the safest space to tell a story just to one person, and then if desired to tell it to the whole group. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a wonderful way to do it.
Okay, I think we are almost at the end. I hope you will join us for the storytelling workshop. I am sure there will be more time to speak about storytelling and techniques. And yeah, Munir, would you like to say a few words?
Okay. Maybe, yeah, I think Munir should have sent
Thank
this.
you once again
There
to
you are.
both of you, and we'll see you on Zoom now. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your questions, for being here, showing interest in this topic, and doing the work you do. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely to follow the chat and just everyone popping in from all over the world. And thank you so much for your words of encouragement and for all your wonderful questions. And I hope to see you soon on Zoom.
Okay. Take care.